Hey kids, Mr. Ortlieb here. I hope everyone's well. We only have a little bit left of the school year. All of the assignments that I've been posting, I'm leaving open. Um, they are all due by June 16th. My final grades are due the 17th of June, so please get them done before the 16th of June. I'll be sending you reminders on, yes, remind. So I do want to go through this little presentation here. It's called natural selection. I don't know if you ever heard of natural selection, but natural selection is the process by which species evolve here on Earth. So it is another term for evolution, the evolution or changing of species over time. So let me just go through a few slides for you. There is attached Castle Learning questions. Please complete those and let's begin. Okay, so natural selection. Yeah, I got a little crazy with the animation, excuse me. Okay, so this guy, you might know him, maybe you don't. His name is Charles Darwin. He is considered the father of modern evolution, natural selection, if you will. He lived from 1809 to 1882. He lived in England. He was an English chap. And he's considered the father of evolution. So, why was he considered the father of evolution? Well, he went on this journey when he was a young man. His father bought him a passage on a ship that traveled the world. And that ship was called the HMS Beagle. And this is a replica of it. Wasn't the actual ship, but this is what the ship actually looked like. Here are the floor plans. And he lived on this boat for 5 years. He went around the world for 5 years, and he visited lots of spots. Now, he was the naturalist or the biologist on the boat. He wasn't a sailor. He wasn't a laborer. He was the actual naturalist. So what he did is he collected a bunch of samples. Okay, let me go through this. All right, so this was actually a map of his journey. So he starts here in England in 1831. He left his girlfriend behind, sad to say, but when he came back, she married him 5 years later. Isn't that romantic? Anyway, so he leaves England. They come down here. This is actually on the way back. So they came down here. They stopped along the coast. So what they wanted to do, they had a couple of different objectives. One was to actually map different parts of the world. So this is the 1800s. A lot of the coasts were not mapped correctly. So one of the objectives was to map the world or map some parts of the world. But you could see here, all these red dots means that they stopped. And the last stop in South America was the Galapagos Islands. Now, the Galapagos Islands are famous for a lot of things. One of them is this kind of theory of evolution that he put forward based on these birds called finches. So what he noticed that the Galapagos are made up of several different islands, and each island has a different type of environment, different types of food, even some different types of weather. So what he noticed is that each of these finches, their birds, had a specific adaptation or trait that helps them survive with their beaks. So there were ones with big beaks like this, there were one little tiny tapered beaks like this. But what he figured out is that each one was adapted to eat certain types of foods. For instance, this big one here ate big, hard seeds that you needed to crack open to eat. This guy right here, he had like a little probing beak, and what that means is he kind of stuck his beak inside trees and plants and even flowers to extract the food out of them. So each bird had a different beak, and they were adapted to their different environments. So what he did is he put all this stuff together, and this is a copy of his original book. It's called on the Origin of Species. It was published in 1859. It was a little controversial then because obviously the main mode of creation of life people thought was God. That God was the main reason why all living things were here, and God created everything in the way he created it from day one. Here he comes with a book and says, listen, I think species might change over time, and they aren't exactly how they were thousands and millions of years ago. So he was met with some challenge from the religious community. So it was at the time it was considered a very controversial book. Today it's considered just one of the great books ever written, put together. So um, whether you want to challenge the theory of evolution or not, we're just going to talk about the scientific process here. Okay, all right. Okay, so what is natural selection? It's the process by which organisms evolve or change over time. Now, this is how it really happens. Organisms that are best adapted, that have the best traits to suit their environment, they will survive and they will reproduce and they will pass those traits to the next generation, which means if you survive, your traits survive. And if your traits are really good, they get more and more common in a species population. So the process results in change over time in species. Natural selection accounts for the diversity of life on Earth. So how does it work? Let's see if my little thing here works. No, it's not working right now. Okay. Anyway, so here's an example. So these black birds, these crows, whatever you want to call them, they like yummy green beetles. As you can see in the beetle population, there are green ones and there are orange ones. So if you're a green beetle, it's not that good for you. Why? Because the crows, whether they think that you're delicious or they can see you better, they're eating the green beetles. They're not eating the orange ones. So after the next generation, what would you predict to happen? Would there be less green beetles and more orange beetles? Yes, you're exactly right. Generations later, as you can see, because the birds are only eating the green ones, the green beetles are starting to become less common in the population. The orange ones here are becoming more common. Why? Because they are surviving and reproducing. Look what happens in the next generation. Pretty soon, the entire population is orange. Why? Because orange was a trait that helped you survive. The blackbirds didn't want to eat the orange ones. Now, would they start eating the orange ones now? Who knows? But this is a simple example of how species can change over time. These beetles changed over time because of the survival advantage of their characteristics, in this case, color. All right. So you need a few things for natural selection. Now, what do you need? You need to produce a lot of offspring, and that's what overproduction is. So whether you're frog eggs over here or whether you're poppy flowers over here, both living things, you make a lot of offspring, or at least have the potential to produce a lot of offspring. Right, so you have lots of kittens being born. I just had a cat at my house give birth to kittens. You don't they don't just make one, they make 4 or 5 or 6 at a time. Ducklings and the geese, as you might remember from school, the same idea. All right. So, predators. What limits the species population? So, there's always these limits in population, and that means there's always going to be competition. Now, what does that mean? Well, here you have a lion trying to take down this wildebeest here. There's always a competition for food, all right? Among the same species, lions compete for food. Over here on the right, you have the peacock. What is the peacock competing here? It's not food. He's competing for mates. So the male peacocks compete for the same female peacocks. Okay. But there are other things that limit the species populations, like disease and climate change. Listen, not all species survive. That's the sad part of this. All right. Only the ones with the best traits. In this case, maybe the fastest lion or the strongest lion or the most pretty male peacock. All right. So not all of them have the same traits. Here's a classic example of the poor polar bear here. This polar bears here, they look kind of solemn right here, floating on a piece of ice, which is another issue. Ice is melting and it's killing the polar bears. But let's talk about, why do they have white fur? They have white fur to help them blend into the snow background. And that gives them an advantage on hunting their prey. The prey can't see them as well. All right. So, what else do you need for natural selection? You need variation. And variations are differences of your traits inherited from their parents or your parents. Now, variation means that even though let me give you an example. Even though we're all humans, we all look different. We're different sizes, we're different colors, we're different personalities. We have different immune systems. We have lots of variations. So, what causes those variations? One is sex, sexual reproduction, specifically the processes of meiosis and fertilization. It mixes up the genes, right? I have two older sisters. We're all from the same parents, but we look very different. Why? Because sexual reproduction mixes up the genes. All right. Next one are mutations. Mutations occur. Hold on. So mutations occur, and that can change your traits as well. Sometimes the mutations are good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're indifferent, they don't make a difference. But sometimes mutations definitely produce variation. Look at these bugs here. This is a 83,000 different species of snout beetle. All right. So they're all slight variations of the same type of beetle. Look at these snails up here. Look at these ladybugs. They're all the same species. They just have different variations. Look at these frogs down here. Different variations of a same or similar species. All right, so why is it important variation? Well, because it can produce new traits. And if those new traits give you an increase in your chances of survival, then that trait will survive. Okay. And if a trait that increases your survival, it's called an adaptation. All right. So adaptations occur all the time. And sometimes it takes a long time to figure out what is an adaptation and what is not. But basically, all the traits that help you survive, they survive in the species. The ones that are not helpful, they die out. All right, so here's a classic example of the pepper colored moth. So on the left here, you see a pepper colored moth here. It looks like pepper color because it looks like it's been sprinkled with pepper. And it lives on this birch bark right here. Now, as you can see, it kind of looks, it's camouflaged. And that is good because it doesn't get eaten as often. But there's a natural variation that exists in the moths. All right, some are pepper colored, some are dark. Now, if you're a bird or whatever's eating these moths, you can see the dark colored ones a lot better than you can see the pepper colored ones. So you might have guessed that being a dark colored moth on the light background is not good. You're going to get eaten. Therefore, you're not going to live to survive and reproduce. And therefore, the pepper color trait is going to survive in the species. However, one quick story. During the Industrial Revolution in England, a lot of the black soot from the factories, the smoke that would come up through the smokestack, it would settle on the trees. And all that black stuff would make the tree bark darker. So now the variation still existed in the moths, but now who's got the advantage? The black colored moths, right? The pepper colored moths, they stand out on the background of the black colored trees now. So what happened is that the pepper colored moths became less the pepper colored trait becomes a less important trait for survival, and the black colored moth they started reproducing more, and their numbers went up. So it says the environment really kind of can control what trait is an advantage versus what trait is not. Look at this toad right here. Camouflage against the background in which it lives helps protect it from predators. Here's another type of camouflage. This is a leaf bug. It actually looks very, very similar to a leaf. Very, very good camouflage to protect it from predators. Adaptation. And this is not camouflage. This is actually something called mimicry. So what this kind of circle on this moth or butterfly is it's supposed to mimic like an eye of a big animal, maybe an owl or maybe some other animal. So a predator will see that circle, think it's another type of animal, maybe a bigger animal, and not go after it. It's called mimicry, but again, another type of adaptation. Termites. Now, termites are cool. Termites actually can digest wood, and that is an adaptation. All right. So not all organisms, even carpenter ants that live in wood, they can't digest it like termites. Termites have this enzyme that they can actually digest wood. That is something that helps them survive. This is something called a gazelle. And what these gazelles do is they do something called stodding. And now stodding is they jump really, really high in the air. You'd be saying, what the hell does that do? Was it jump away from predators? Well, scientists thought that they were actually the reason why they jumped was to kind of help them protect them, to protect the herd, to warn them that there's a predator coming. All right. But what they actually found out is that the reason why these things jump so high is it shows the predator how fit they are, that they can jump high and run fast. So don't even try to come get me. Go get the old ones, go get the sick ones, go get the little ones. Don't try to hurt me because I'm going to outrun you. So it's basically showing off to the predator, don't try to get me. The higher they jump, the better. It shows the predator that they're in really, really good shape. Oh, last but not least, environmental change. I kind of mentioned this before. When the environment changes, it actually can determine what traits are going to be important for survival. So in this environment here, it looks like a drought, right? The river looks like it's drying up. So if you're an organism like maybe a camel that can store a lot of water for a long period of time, that's an advantage. If you're an organism that needs to drink water several times a day, maybe every hour, then maybe that's not an advantage. Maybe you have other adaptations that help you keep your water. Maybe you don't sweat a lot. Maybe you don't need to use a lot of water in your chemical processes. But I'm just saying, this is just an example. Environmental change is the driving force of evolutionary change. If there's an change in the environment, there's going to be a change in the species. All right. Inheritance of adaptations. The organisms best adapted to the environment will survive, reproduce, and pass on the traits of the offspring. If you survive, you reproduce. If you reproduce, you pass your traits. The adaptive trait will become more and more common in a population or increase in frequency. For instance, the frequency or how frequent the trait is. Um, let's give you a human example. Hair on top of your head is a frequent trait. It's very has a very high frequency in the human race. Okay, so um, again, frequency is how common traits are in a species. Okay, a couple more things. Adaptive value is a measure of how helpful a trait is for the organism's survival. If it helps you survive, it's got a high adaptive value. Just some terms that you might see. Thick fur in polar bears for warmth has a high adaptive value because it keeps them warm. If you're a polar bear and you're born without fur, you're probably in trouble. Frequency, how often a trait occurs in a population. Again, we mentioned that already. White fur has a high frequency in polar bears. Most polar bears have white fur. Some don't. There are some mutations, which we talked about before, variations. But if you're a polar bear born with dark fur, you're going to stand out in the snowy environment, and that's not going to be good when you're trying to hunt for food. All right, extinction. So if you can't adapt, if you don't have these adaptive traits to help you survive, your species will become extinct, which means it cannot survive. It will die out due to lack of adaptations, like the dinosaurs and others. All right. Here's a little, let me skip that one. All right, so let's summarize. Some organisms have traits, adaptations that help them survive in their environment. Organisms that survive, reproduce, and pass these traits or adaptations to their offspring. Okay, so if you survive, you reproduce and pass your traits. Those adaptive traits become more common in the species. The traits that don't help in survival become less common. So, again, if a trait helps you survive, it's going to cause you to survive. You're going to reproduce and pass those traits to your offspring. Okay. All right. So this is an example I like to kind of use in the classroom. So let me just go through it real quick. So these are kind of four important things that are important for evolution. This is a little family of whatever you want to call them. You can see that they all are different sizes. There's a lot of variation in the family. There's different colors. There's different sizes. Okay. And there's variation in the food. Some food are bigger, some are smaller, some are higher, some are lower. So the overproduction here, these proud parents here, that the parents produced a lot of offspring. As you can see, there are two that are already dead. This little guy right here is probably on his way out. All right. So there's lots of offspring that they produce. Not all of them are going to survive. Where is the variation? Well, specifically here, the offspring are different heights. Okay, if you have brothers and sisters, everyone knows that, you might have a brother that's 6'3", and then you might have a brother that's 5'7". This is variation. This is what happens. Competition. They're competing for the same food. There's food there for them, right? Not all of them have access to it, which is what I'm saying here. food is less accessible. The environmental change means that the food is growing higher and higher and higher, and that's causing these guys, only the ones with the longest legs, if you will, are going to survive. The short ones are not going to survive. So what's happening here is that the taller ones are going to survive, they're going to reproduce, and they're going to produce probably taller babies. And if you do this generation after generation after generation, you're going to get a change in species, probably a taller species. All right, I think that's it. Okay. All right. So I just want to wish you luck with this. There'll be a few more assignments. Um, I'm gonna send out a YouTube video. I know I keep saying it, but I haven't done it. I will send out a YouTube video kind of summarizing what you need to know about the end of the year. Okay. So I wish you luck and be well. Love you guys.